So, Nicole, I'll come back to you. Knowing what you know based on what you've seen over the past few months, is there anything you're planning on changing going forward, or anything you would recommend to anyone out there responsible for cybersecurity about something they should be thinking of or maybe more mindful of going forward?
Wow, that's a really tough question. I think it's just honestly, it just feels like more of the same. And just being consistently paying attention to, to what we're doing, and we'll be making some changes for to the environment moving forward for our remote workers, but just consistently being vigilant. We talked a little bit about training. We'll be continually increasing our training and increasing our phishing attempts just to make sure that our end users know that we can have all the very expensive security tools that we have, but if a phishing email does get through our filtering, that they are our biggest vulnerability. And so I think that, that's one of the basic cores for cybersecurity, and it's just to continue that vigilance.
It's a great point. I'm reminding people constantly, these cybersecurity issues predated COVID. COVID just simply made them worse in many cases and more challenging. So
Yeah,
vigilance is important.
sorry to interrupt. We saw a
No,
lot of phishing pertaining to COVID specific, like that's what they were using to try to phish people. And then, of course, there were malware sites that were related to COVID. And so, yeah, we definitely, while we have always been highly phished, that changed. We had to educate our staff on being a little bit more vigilant with making sure they still were paying attention to what they were clicking on.
I will say I'm a huge believer in the awareness training. I think it's a critical part of any multi-layered approach. But I was reminded today when I was on another call that awareness does not always equal ability. And unfortunately, I think that maybe is what we're starting to see with some of these remote workers is they might be aware. Are they able to execute on what we're asking them to execute on? Maybe not. Alex, I'll give you the same question I gave Nicole, kind of looking
Yeah.
back towards March, things that you would have done differently or things that you suggest others should be mindful of going forward?
Yeah, so I completely agree that the same issues were before, they are just now, but it is a new lens that we can put on the question. And so bringing one of Jeremy's last points in, which I think is spot on, you really as an organization have to understand your risks and your risk tolerance. Kingland's business has a certain risk tolerance, a certain if we lose data, that has a certain consequence to us. That's different than what other organizations go through. And so this is not a one size fits all type problem. And I think this, if nothing else, if you aren't doing a risk assessment, you should start doing that today. For us, we are doing one, but this puts a different lens on it. We did actually identify pandemics as a risk. I rated that as unlikely to occur. That was January. Our future, we are unable as humans to project what actually will happen in the future, but still by identifying the risk makes you think about the risk. And I think that's one of the absolutely critical points. The second comment I would have is we have DLP or data loss protection tooling in place, but we are taking a step back specifically on that because a lot of your data loss protection tends to be the fortress gives that to you. And when you're outside the fortress, how good is that? And so we're specifically looking at data loss protection, data exfiltration, and I think that that's a critical thing for everyone to look at. And finally, no one control, especially if humans are part of the control, is sufficient. And so it is the age-old statement but what is the defense in depth? And so one of the things we're looking at is how many security countermeasures do we have for a given scenario? 1, 2, 3, 7, which means that if I only have one countermeasure in place, I better hope that the risk of that failing isn't very high because I'll be exposed. And so really taking a step back on what are the countermeasures, how strong are they, how deep are they, will give us all comfort as security professionals what kind of posture we actually have. And you match that with risk, and I think you start being able to say, here's the right investment decisions, whether you're a big business, a medium business, or a small business.
Great points, Alex. So Jeremy, lessons learned in all of this?
Well, for my business, the lesson learned is you really need to have that management tool. So like Alex pointed out, being able to remotely patch machines from wherever they're at. You need to have some type of tool that can talk to your systems outside the fortress and keep them up to date. Having that tool for me allowed my clients to keep going, to continue getting patched, to continue having the tools they needed to continue working remotely. I think the other lesson learned is we live in a very connected world, and internet access is very important. And so people are relying on their access more than ever now. And so making sure that you have the access you need at the time you need is very important.
Great points.